She saved a lost wolf pup in the forest, only to learn he belonged to the ruthless Alpha King. Mira Colton had always been the kind of person who noticed things other people walked past. A bent flower stem, a bird with one weak wing, a stray cat hiding under a porch during a storm. Her mother used to say she had a heart that couldn't mind its own business, and maybe that was true, because on the cold October afternoon, when she should have been hurrying home before dark, she stopped instead, because she heard something crying near the old fallen log by Miller's Creek. She almost didn't go closer. The forest at the edge of town had a reputation. People said wolves lived deep in those trees. Real wolves, the kind that were smarter and stranger than any animal had a right to be. Some folks even whispered about a hidden kingdom tucked somewhere past the ridgeline, ruled by a man so powerful and so cold that his own soldiers didn't dare look him in the eye. Mira had always thought those were just stories parents told to keep kids from wandering too far. Still, the crying sound pulled at something in her chest, and she found herself pushing through the brush before she could talk herself out of it. Under the broken log, shivering in a nest of wet leaves, was a wolf pup. He was small, smaller than he should have been for his age, with muddy gray fur plastered to his thin body, and eyes that looked too tired for something so young. When he saw her, he didn't run. He just whimpered louder, like he'd been waiting for someone to finally show up. "Hey," Mira whispered, crouching down slowly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The pup pressed himself back against the log, trembling, but when she reached out her hand, he sniffed it once, twice, and then, to her surprise, leaned into her palm like he'd made a decision. She scooped him up gently, tucking him inside her jacket where it was warm, and he immediately burrowed against her, letting out a small sound that wasn't quite a whimper anymore. It was closer to relief. She should have left him there. She should have walked away and let nature take its course, the way her older brother always told her to when she found injured animals. But she couldn't do it. Not with him shaking like that. Not with him looking at her like she was the only safe thing left in the world. So she carried him home. Her house was small and a little messy, the kind of place that always smelled like whatever her mother had baked that morning. Her parents were away visiting her aunt for the week, which meant Mira had the house to herself, and for once, she was grateful for the quiet. She set the pup down on a folded towel near the fireplace and got to work. She warmed some milk, mixed it with a little broth, and used an old dropper she found in the kitchen drawer to feed him slowly, drop by drop, until his shivering finally began to calm. "You're going to be okay," she told him, more to comfort herself than him. "I've got you now." She named him Bramble, because of the little scratches on his side from the thorny bushes near the creek. Over the next 3 days, Bramble became the center of her world. She fed him every few hours. She kept the fire going so he'd stay warm. She slept on the living room floor beside him instead of her own bed, one hand resting lightly on his side so she could feel him breathing, feel the little rise and fall that reassured her he was still there, still safe, still hers, even though some quiet part of her mind knew he wasn't really hers to keep. Bramble grew stronger fast, faster than she expected, honestly. By the second day, he was already walking steadily around the living room, sniffing at furniture, chasing dust motes in the sunlight like any curious young animal would. By the third day, his eyes had lost that dull, exhausted look and had turned bright and alert, almost unsettlingly aware. Sometimes Mira caught him staring at her in a way that felt less like a wolf pup and more like someone thinking very carefully about something. She told herself she was imagining it. Wolves were smart, that was all. Just smart animals. She had no idea how right and how wrong that thought was. On the third night, everything changed. Mira was outside on the back porch, wrapped in her coat, watching the last bit of orange sunlight fade behind the tree line, while Bramble sniffed around the yard. It was peaceful, too peaceful maybe, because she didn't notice the shift in the air until the birds went silent. All at once, like someone had reached out and turned off the whole forest. She stood up slowly, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. Bramble froze mid-step, ears pinned back, body low to the ground. And then, from the tree line, a man stepped out of the shadows like he belonged to them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that looked far too fine for wandering through the woods. His hair was black, his jaw sharp, and his eyes, even from a distance, held a kind of weight that made Mira's breath catch in her throat. He didn't look like someone who got lost. He looked like someone the forest itself would step aside for. "That pup," the man said, his voice low and controlled, carrying easily across the yard, "belongs to me." Mira's arms instinctively curled around Bramble as he darted back toward her legs. "He was alone in the woods," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Freezing, half-starved. If I hadn't found him, he wouldn't have made it." Something flickered across the man's face, something sharp and unreadable. "Give him to me," he said again, and this time it wasn't a request. It was the kind of command that expected to be obeyed simply because of who was giving it. "He's not just some stray," Mira said, surprising herself with her own stubbornness. "He's a living thing that was scared and alone, and I'm not just going to hand him over to a stranger who shows up out of nowhere." For a moment, the man looked almost amused, like her defiance was the last thing he expected, and somehow the most interesting thing that had happened to him in a long time. But then Bramble, who had been trembling against Mira's leg, suddenly darted forward across the grass toward the man. Mira opened her mouth to call him back, but before the sound could even leave her throat, something extraordinary happened. Bramble's small body began to shimmer, the edges of him blurring like heat rising off summer pavement. His 4 legs stretched and lengthened. His fur receded into pale skin. Within seconds, where a wolf pup had been standing, there was now a boy, no older than 9, crouched naked and shivering on the cold grass. "Papa," the boy said, his voice small and hoarse, and he stumbled forward into the man's waiting arms. Mira stood frozen on the porch, her mind struggling to catch up with what her eyes had just seen. The stories were real. The forest, the hidden kingdom, all of it. And apparently, so was the boy she had been feeding milk to with a dropper for 3 days straight. The man wrapped his coat around his son immediately, kneeling in the grass, his usually hard expression softening into something achingly relieved. He held the boy tightly, one hand pressed against the back of his head, and for a moment, he wasn't a king, or a stranger, or anything frightening at all. He was just a father who had gotten his child back. Then his eyes lifted to meet Mira's, and the hardness returned, though something else lingered underneath it now. "You fed him," he said. It wasn't a question. "He was starving," Mira replied quietly. "You kept him warm. He was freezing. Anyone would have done the same." "No," the man said, standing slowly while keeping one arm firmly around his son's shoulders. "Not anyone. My men searched for 11 days. Some of them didn't come back at all. Others returned with nothing. You found him in 3 days, took him in, cared for him, and never once tried to sell him, cage him, or turn him over to anyone for a reward." He studied her carefully, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. "Why?" Mira looked down at the boy, who was peeking out from his father's coat, his small face still pale but no longer scared. She thought about the sound he'd made that first night under the log, the way he'd leaned into her hand like he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to finally show up. "Because he was scared," she said simply, "and when something is scared and alone, it doesn't need explanations or reasons. It just needs someone to stay with it until it feels safe again." The man was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved gently through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the birds finally began to sing again, as if the whole forest had been holding its breath along with them. "My name is Alaric," he said finally. "I am the ruler of the pack that lives beyond that ridge. This is my son, Kellen. He wandered off during a storm 11 days ago, and half my kingdom has been searching every corner of these woods since." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "You have done something my most skilled trackers could not. The pack owes you a debt, and I intend to see it repaid properly." Mira shook her head quickly. "I don't need anything. I just want to know he's going to be okay." "That's all?" Alaric asked, one eyebrow rising slightly, as though he genuinely hadn't expected such a simple answer. "No gold? No favors? No protection for your family, should you ever need it?" "I just want him to be safe," Mira said again, glancing down at Kellen, who was watching her with wide, curious eyes. "That's the only thing that matters to me." Something shifted in Alaric's expression then, something that looked almost like respect, or perhaps disbelief, or maybe both at once. "You are either the kindest person I have ever met," he said slowly, "or the only one who has never wanted something from me. I'm not certain which is more remarkable." Before Mira could respond, Kellen wriggled slightly in his father's arms and reached one small hand out toward her. Mira stepped forward without thinking and took it gently, and the boy's fingers curled tightly around hers, refusing to let go, exactly the way he had refused to let go of comfort 3 nights earlier, under that fallen log. "Thank you," Kellen whispered, his voice still hoarse from the transformation, "for staying." Mira felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Of course," she said softly. "I'm glad you're safe." Alaric watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, though the tension that had been in his shoulders since he first stepped out of the trees seemed to ease slightly. "He doesn't often trust people so quickly," he said. "He gets that from his mother, may she rest peacefully. I confess, he does not get it from me." "Maybe he knows kindness when he feels it," Mira offered. "Perhaps," Alaric said. He studied her a moment longer, then gave a small nod, as if deciding something important. "You will not see the last of us, Mira Colton. A debt like this does not simply disappear because the one who is owed it wishes it to, and Kellen, I suspect, will not allow it either." Mira glanced down at the boy, who was still holding her hand tightly, his small face finally relaxed into something like contentment. "I don't mind that," she said quietly, surprising herself with how true it felt. Not one bit. As the sun finished setting behind the tree line, and the first stars began to appear, Mira stood in her backyard holding the hand of a boy who had been a wolf pup only minutes before, watching his father, a king she never knew existed, look at her like she had changed something in his world that could not be undone. And somewhere deep down, beneath the shock and the strangeness of it all, she had the quiet feeling that this was not an ending. It was only the beginning of something much larger than she could have ever imagined.